Hi, this is Jazz Obrecht, and welcome to my Talking Guitar podcast with jazz legend Barney Kessel. In this special episode, Barney speaks exclusively about his hero, Charlie Christian. First, some backstory. In 1940, when Barney was 16, he played electric guitar in a college band called the Varsitonians. One evening, when the band was playing the Oklahoma Club in Christian's hometown of Oklahoma City, Kessel looked out into the audience and was astounded to see Charlie Christian smiling up at him. Kessel happily loaned him his guitar to sit in with the band. After the show, Christian invited Kessel to join him for a meal. Due to Jim Crow laws, they were turned away from several establishments and finally found a place that allowed them to sit together out of sight in the kitchen. Christian invited Kessel to jam with him the next afternoon. When they met, Charlie had brought along a pianist and a drummer. As Barney told it, Charlie told me many things that day, such as the importance of swing when playing jazz. He said it was important to get some fire going, get an emotion. No matter what else you do, get that feeling. As Charlie was leaving, Kessel recalled, he turned around and said, "I'm going to tell the Barney about you." I never saw him again, but I never forgot that day. I consider it one of the highlights of my life. Kessel went on to become one of the leading disciples of Charlie Christian and a jazz guitar legend in his own right. When I arrived at Guitar Player magazine in 1978, I became the editor of Barney's monthly column. 3 years later, while preparing materials for my Charlie Christian cover story, I asked Barney if he'd be willing to talk to me about Charlie. He responded with unabashed enthusiasm, talking nonstop about Charlie for 3/4 of an hour. I included portions of this conversation in my March 1982 cover story. Here, for the first time ever, is the complete audio of our November 1981 conversation about Charlie Christian.
Now, I do want to tell you that I'll be very happy to do this thing with you because it's first of all it is a matter of personal love because I'll just tell you that I had a special feeling. We can go into all of this, but just to let you know that I think it could be a really good story because I have just a great personal affection and regard for Charlie Christian and for what he stood for. And getting to meet him as well, and being from the same part of the country. I'm actually living right now in the city where he came from to join Benny Goodman, and all of that. The fact that I played with so many people when I was growing up that had played with him, and in listening to his music now, and even being more moved by it now than I was even then. That it's a great pleasure to do this, and I feel really glad to be the one to be talking about it with you.
Why should a young guy who's learning guitar now go back and listen to Charlie Christian? What did he contribute to the guitar? How did he make the guitar different?
Well, it wouldn't matter whether it was a young guy or not, Jess. It's just anyone that's interested in music, as they're interested in any art form. It wouldn't matter what it would be, that you gain an awful lot by studying those people that preceded you, and not only to study them, but to study them in a kind of sequential form, chronographically, the way it occurred. It helps to get a better understanding of where we are today and how it came about. Charlie Christian's contribution to the electric guitar was as big as Thomas Edison's contributions and Benjamin Franklin's contributions in terms of changing the direction of the world. He changed the guitar world. He changed it not so much as being a superb guitar player, but rather the music that he made. And anyone that would study him can see where all the other guitar players that came after him evolved, that they came from his fountainhead. They came from that and went their own way according to their own taste, but he was a way shower. He was as much a way shower as any philosophical giant that other people have come along and patted themselves after. And contributions were so strong in several departments. One is there's been very few people on any instrument that have come since him that have had his sense of time, his ability to play in time in a way that he plays, his spacing of his notes. That's one of the things. The other thing is he was years ahead of most of the people he was playing with in terms of the lines he was playing. They involved certain chord changes that were not existent then.
Could you give me an example?
Just his playing, just his chords. I mean, not an analyzation of it, but if you listen to any of the blues that he played, you will hear in the line that he has spelled out harmonic changes that none of the others on the records are playing, not even the background. And yet, they're refreshing and they fit, but he's played more chord changes in his lines, more, and also interesting ones, different ones that existed at the time. Any record would be an example of that. Any example. Any record. In addition, his tone was more the concept of what is being used today in jazz and all along. It is more of a velvet sound. It is not it's just the antithesis of a rock and roll sound or a pop rock or punk rock sound. It is more an electric guitar sound rather than an electronic guitar sound. And a lot of people don't understand this either. I have people that come up to me and they think that what I want now and what Charlie Christian wanted then is they think that all that we wanted is simply to amplify the natural sound of the guitar and just make the natural sound louder. That's not true. That's a different sound entirely. The electric guitar, as he played it, had its own sound. So we've got three different sounds really we're talking about. One is we've got a regular acoustic guitar where you put something on it and it doesn't change the sound, it only makes it louder.
Right.
Now that's one thing. The other is the actual sound of an electric guitar coming through a particular pickup that sounds like an electric guitar, which is different. And then you've got things that people are playing today in the rock and pop and etc., which is really an electronic sound.
Mm-hmm.
And so his tone was more horn-like. It's more like the velvety sound of some of the saxophone players and trombone players. It was more horn. As a matter of fact, many people that heard him play that didn't know him and didn't even know that they were listening to a guitar, they didn't know anything about it. They just simply were going to this club where he might be playing, and they'd hear the music from outside, and they didn't know that there was such a thing as an electric guitar. Almost all of them thought that it was a tenor saxophone.
Really?
Yeah, from a distance. I mean, the combination of not knowing that Charlie Christian existed, not knowing to expect an electric guitar, not having heard anyone play it good or bad, and just hearing this sound, thinking somehow that it's from a distance and being outside of the building and hearing it with a band, but hearing this instrument, thinking somehow that it's kind of a rather slightly percussive tenor sax, maybe someone that is maybe even slap-tonguing it a little bit. And let's see. But those are the main things. I mean, those were his strengths, and he was the first guitar player, to my way of thinking, who, in sitting down with a bunch of horn players to play, that the content of his music was just as on a high level as theirs, if not higher in certain cases. Whereas in the past, before Charlie Christian, anytime I'd ever heard anyone play the guitar in the company of various horn players, like be it Benny Goodman or Jack Teagarden or Tommy Dorsey or whoever these guys might be, the only thing you could say is that guy might be one of the best of guitar players. It's kind of like he's the best of what's around, but it is as good as what the horn players are playing. He's playing good to be a guitar player. See, so it was that kind of thing. But Charlie Christian was the first one that played single lines more like a horn plays them, without being a part of the tradition that preceded him, which was that almost all the players before him, almost all of them, especially the older ones, especially ones that had been playing from 1920s, came to the guitar from a banjo orientation, most of them. And so when they came to it, with no disrespect to any of these people, because they made beautiful music, but that's why when you hear George Van Epps in those days, when you hear Alan Roos, you hear Dick McDonough, Carl Kress, etc., what you're hearing is you're hearing a guy who, for one reason or another, either the economic pressures of the day forced him, the orchestra leader insisted that he change from banjo to guitar, or he decided to do it. Very much like the change that went through in the late 50s and 60s when many string bass players found that in order to keep a job that they had to switch to electric bass, whether they wanted to or not. Mm-hmm. And some of them did, and some of them didn't. But so those guitar players, when they played, they were playing guitar solos in those days, the 20s, 1920s and 30s, like with Paul Whiteman and Bing Crosby and all those people, Joe Venuti. When they were playing, they brought to it they were banjo players that had switched to guitar, and the music came out that way. Now, Charlie Christian did not have that banjo background. As a matter of fact, there are different rumors around that he at one time played the trumpet a little bit, and he played saxophone a little, and he, for health reasons, he couldn't play a blowing instrument because he had an inclination, he and his whole family had an inclination towards developing tuberculosis. And so he couldn't involve himself with anything that would affect his respiratory system. But yet he had those things in his mind. So it's kind of like a guy that either has played tenor or wants to play tenor, but he's playing the guitar.
So he thought like a tenor.
Yes, yeah. Well, Lester Young was his ideal.
Uh-huh.
Lester Young was his inspiration.
How immediate was Charlie's impact?
Extremely immediate. But it was not only immediate nationally when it broke immediately, but it was immediate locally wherever he went. Because I think there's three basic things that was involved. One is that the instrument itself had never been heard. I mean, there just weren't guys around playing the electric guitar. That in itself is a novelty. The fact that he played it in the style that he played it. I mean, had he come along and played the amplified guitar, but had played it like everybody else was playing it, that would have been fairly novel in itself, in that you'd never heard anyone play the electric guitar. But he wouldn't have been playing it differently. But here he comes along and not only plays a new instrument, but he's playing it in a different way. That is, he's playing single lines like a horn. And now, even that would not have accounted for the impact that he had, because you could have been playing horn-like figures, and you could be playing cliches that horn players are playing, and you're not really playing anything new. You're just playing things that the only thing you've got going for you is things that you're playing have been around for years, but never on a guitar. The third thing is he was playing new things and was playing his own personal talent. So those are the three things that it was. You were listening to a new instrument played in a new way and played extremely well. So it did make a big impact immediately. But in those days, economically, we were not living in the superstar type of life, and so he had this fame among musicians, but not among the public. And there wasn't a lot of hype going in those days. There weren't like Gibson didn't come to him and take out ads, and he wasn't. There were no Naris Awards, and there wasn't all the hype that goes on. And so the public was not as aware of him, and also his money was not commensurate with his talent. Whereas today, people with less talent can even make far more money because they are more organized. They've got a manager, and they've got they do things to expose themselves and to market their product better.
Who have been the foremost players to come out of the Charlie Christian school besides yourself, Barney?
Well, I would say Herb Ellis. Now I must tell you this: there are certain people that say that they were influenced by Charlie Christian. Now there's others that don't say that they were. I think that I really believe that almost everybody that plays the electric guitar today has been influenced by him, whether they know it or not. Mm-hmm. It's just the same way that when a guy turns on an electric light bulb in a room, he may not really know. He may really be so dumb that he doesn't know that Edison invented it, but he's still using it and he's involved with it, even though he doesn't know where it comes from.
Right.
So I think that Charlie came so early and contributed so much so early that he made a big enough impact that it became a way. It just became a way of playing, just like Charlie Parker is not the only one that plays alto, but his way became a way and a big way. Mm-hmm. It's like it's kind of the definitive way, sort of. And many guitar players either will not admit that they've been influenced by him because they don't really realize that they have, or they don't want to consider, their ego may be involved, that they don't want to consider anybody's influenced them, that they've got it all together themselves. And then there's others that I've read about, certain people, without getting into names, that say they were influenced by Charlie Christian, but as I listen to them, I honestly cannot see what it was that influenced them, because I don't see the things that Charlie had so abundantly. I don't see those particular things in these players. Even though the players themselves might be good, they're good in a different way that Charlie Christian was. So I'm amazed that they say they were influenced by him. Mm-hmm. But to get back to your question, Yas, people that come to mind that I can feel their influence is Herb Ellis and Joe Pass and Jim Hall in the beginning, although Jim has moved away from it. Now, some of these people have moved away from it, or they've diluted it, or they've taken on, their experiences have led to learning other things as well. And in the learning of other things, they've sort of branched out and kind of got away from it. But it's still in them slightly, in some of them. I think of Chuck Wayne, Remo Palmieri. Now, there might be some more. I just can't think. If you could throw some names at me, I could tell you whether or not they were, whether I thought they were influenced by him. I don't know. There's a lot of them that claim that they were. But as I say, when I listen to some of them, I cannot tell that they were. Those people, I would say outside of myself, that Herb Ellis would definitely be one. And there was a guy that was influenced years ago. The guy that wrote Cement Mixer, Slim Gaillard, was affected by him. Tiny Grimes was. Just trying to think. If you wanted to throw some names at me, I'd be happy to respond to it.
Barney, what would you consider to be the essential recorded Charlie Christian?
All of it.
Where would somebody go to start, though? Could you name a half dozen cuts?
Well, for one thing, it would be very easy just to get a 2-record album on Columbia called The Genius of Charlie Christian. Mm-hmm. Which actually was not made under his name, but was repackaged by John Hammond.
That's Solo Flights?
Yes.
Okay.
Now, that's one, but that does not by any means contain all of that he made, or necessarily all of the best. I would say if you could get that album and get another album, Columbia, Benny Goodman's Sextet, you'd have to look, I don't know the particular name of it, but Columbia albums that have been repackaged from singles, because he never made an album that way, but where it might be under Benny Goodman's name.
Yeah.
And there might be other takes on these things. Then there was a jam session that was recorded on a Wilcox Gay recording machine at one time that came out for one label. It came out, was called Vox, and I don't know if that is still under that name, but the record is available. And I know if you buy it, on one side there'll be that jam session at Minton's, and on the other side it's an example of early Dizzy Gillespie playing with Monk and I'm just trying to think some of the tunes. Well, the album I'm talking about is where he was jamming all night, and one of the tracks on there, one of the songs was called "Stompin' at the Savoy." Now, in addition to that, there's about 4 sides that he made that are part of, they would be part of some album. Someone has collated these things, but he made 4 on acoustic guitar with a clarinet player named Edmund Hall. and it's the Edmund Hall Four. Edmund Hall played clarinet, and there was I think Meade Lux Lewis was on celeste, of all things, and then there was a string bass, and then Charlie played non-electric guitar, and that's really the body of his work, because he died very young and did not record very much.
Can you remember, Barney, the very first time you heard Christian?
Yes.
Could you describe
that? You mean on record?
Yeah, the first time you were aware of his existence.
Well, I had heard about him in several ways. First of all, I'm from Oklahoma. I'm actually living in the city right now where he joined Benny Goodman. I mean, where he came from. He was born in Texas, but he lived, the life that he lived before he joined Benny Goodman was in Oklahoma City. And that's about 150 miles from where I was born. And I was playing with a 14-piece black band orchestra. And most of them had already heard of him and knew him. They knew his playing. They had heard of him. They had played with him, some of them. They were always telling me about him. And so I'd heard about him, but I'd never heard him play. And then I had a friend of mine back then who had heard him play, and he was a guitarist, and he told me about him too. So that when I finally heard him, I'd already heard a lot about him. And the first record that I heard was with Benny Goodman, and he actually didn't really have a solo. He just sort of played in the group, and he had a couple of little fills that he played with them, but I wasn't able to tell much. But already I could tell that he was sounding different and good, but I had no idea of the impact. But the first thing I ever heard was a thing called Soft Winds. Soft Winds. That's the first thing I heard. And then the next thing I heard was Flying Home. Well, when I heard it, the only way I could say it so that people that are very, very young today would get an idea of what I felt. It really knocked me out. It just thrilled me. Probably it had the same effect on me as years later. I mean, of course, in a different way, but I'm not talking about the quality of the music. I'm just talking about the emotion. That the way a lot of people, maybe a guy your age, if you were into it at the time, that if you were into that kind of music, the pop music, if you were 16 years old and you're hearing Elvis Presley for the first time, or else either hearing him for the first time or seeing him for the first time on television, or the Beatles, it would be that kind of an impact, that it embodied everything that I ever loved about the guitar and more, because I didn't realize that you could do all of that, and it was beyond me. But it really knocked me out. I mean, I just immediately became a disciple of it. And I would go down to the record store and just bug them to death. Do you have a new Benny Goodman sextet album? Would you call me, or would you let me know when you get one in, a new record? And I'd go down there, and even if I didn't have the money to buy it, I'd just take it into the booth and play it over and over and over. They would have to literally force me out of the record booth and force me out of the store. That's the impact. And I tried to learn every note I could, not so much to call it my own and not so much to copy it. The reason I tried to learn every note is I love to hear it so much that I figured that if I was in a place where I couldn't get to a record player and I still wanted to hear it, if I learned it, I could take out my guitar and play it, and therefore I am acting as the medium or the agent that allows me to hear that song. In other words, what I'm saying is if I at that time I had been able to carry around a portable record player, I would probably have been playing the record over rather than trying to play it on the guitar.
Oh, I see.
I was playing it in order to be able to hear it, not so much of trying to show other people that I knew it.
That really points to an enormous impact.
Yeah, it's just wanting to recall it to myself, wanting to be able to do it, and finding the only way that I could immediately have access to this immediately would be to play it, and therefore I heard it. But it did. It really, And what knocked me out was all of the things that I told you that I thought he was strong in. His time knocked me out. His clarity. The fact that everything that he played made a statement. I mean, there wasn't anything like throwaways. There wasn't little fills that just like kind of creating a little side effect. I mean, everything was a statement. Everything was a statement. And you can go back and listen to these things now, and keeping in mind that there was no high fidelity then, much less stereo. There was no hi-fi. When you hear him play, even back in those days, sometimes they were using only one microphone. He knew enough to get his solo on that record with a lot of presence. And there was no mixing. There was no, I mean, they just made it. That was it. There was no mixing down or being in different channels and we're going to bring you up and we're going to bring the bass down. It was just there. But if you listen to his records, when it's time for him to play, he is on the scene.
From observation, what can you say about his technique?
Well, when I think of technique, I think of control. I don't think of technique in the same way that a lot of people do, so I don't really think that of technique as being only speed or dexterity. I think that if you have certain things you want to say and you're able to say them, that you have the technique that you need. The only time you would be at a loss, technically, is if you needed to do something and couldn't do it. You know what it's like, really? It's like how rich are you or how poor are you that when you want a meal or buy a new suit or buy a new car or take a trip to Europe, that there's always enough money to do it. There's always enough money to do what it is you want to do. Not a lot more than that and not a lot less. So are you really poor or wealthy? It's kind of that way with technique, that if you can do what you need to do, then you've got enough technique. He certainly did not have the kind of technique that people have today, or even a lot of people during that day, because he didn't concentrate on that. It wasn't a big thing. Another thing is he played almost exclusively, probably 95% downstrokes.
Did he use a pick?
Yes.
How did he hold it?
Well, he held it in his thumb and first finger of his right hand very tightly, and he rested his second, third, and fourth fingers very firmly. I mean, not in a relaxed way, but very, very, very tensely on the pick guard.
Ah.
Yeah, they were anchored there. They were anchored. It wasn't like a light anchor. It's not like some guitar players you see where they're kind of rubbing maybe just their little pinky finger kind of using. Have you seen guys do that?
Sure.
Yeah. Well, no, he had them firmly entrenched on that pick guard, almost like there was no break in the joint, in the finger joint. It was just like a straight, solid, long finger that was right there on that there, and he played with the first finger and the thumb, holding the pick, and the pick was a very stiff pick, and it was a triangular pick.
A big one or a smaller one?
Big one.
Did he used all the fingers of his left hand?
He almost exclusively did not use the fourth finger.
He didn't use his little finger?
Almost not ever. Almost.
What kind of, when he was actually playing the guitar, say during the solo, was he real serious and did he concentrate, or did he seem kind of enthusiastic and look around, or?
No, he didn't look around or anything. He was pretty intent on it. He'd play a lot with his eyes closed, or sometimes his eyes might be open, but they'd be kind of moving towards the top of his head. He was pretty much into it.
Now, when you
and he did not move around too much. He wasn't moving, and occasionally he didn't look around either. But occasionally he'd look up. He'd kind of look up from out what it is, and just kind of look around, but sort of go back into it again.
In your two columns on him, you mentioned that he discussed the importance of swinging.
Yeah. See, but even when I say that, there's a lot of people that still don't know what I'm talking about, because they would think that it means swinging your body or kind of grooving and boogieing on out and all that. And it's got to do with the pulse in your playing. It's got to do with the fact that you play in such a rhythmic way. And I'm not talking about whether you rush or drag. I'm just talking about if you play a stream of eighth notes, that you play it in such a way that your time is so flawless that you wouldn't need a bass or drum for someone to sense what the tempo is. it's got such clarity, and it's so articulated that without any rhythm instrument there, you definitely hear what the tempo is. Whereas with a lot of people, they don't play evenly. They don't play that way. So without a bass or drummer, you can't really. The tempo is not clearly stated.
Did Charlie beat time with his foot or anything?
No, I don't know.
Okay. Do any physical characteristics of your jam with him or of Charlie stick out in your mind?
Any what?
Physical characteristics, like of the way he talked or looked or laughed. Did he have any?
Well, he was a pretty inarticulate person. He really kind of spoke, at least to me, in the 3 days that I was with him. He didn't have very much of a vocabulary. It's not that he didn't even talk hip. He didn't say a lot of hip phrases or cliches, but he didn't use a lot of words. And he kind of grunted. And for example, when he talked about Benny Goodman or Lionel Hampton, he addressed them as he said the Benny or the Lionel. That's the way he talked. I mean, he didn't say Lionel or Mr. Hampton or Ben or Benny. It's just like if you're talking to me, you said I was just talking to the Barney. So he said, the Benny and the Lionel, and he didn't get into a lot of philosophy, and he didn't get into a lot of teaching. I just had the feeling that he probably was just kind of streetwise and not, he was so young, and at that time, I mean, he was working hard and just scuffling to make a living before he joined Benny Goodman, just working for peanuts, and I just don't think that he was well educated. I don't mean by any, I don't mean that he was simple or anything. I just meant that he was not a man of letters. He was not well read and all of that, and he did not. I think that, at least to me, he did not express himself as well through words as he did through his music. But he had definite ideas, and he had very sense. Let me just tell you one of the things, because I might have put this in the article. But for instance, I don't know if I put this in the article or not. You can tell me. But for instance, we were jamming, and a guy came up with a tenor saxophone and took it out, uninvited, unannounced, and started to play with us. And he wasn't very good. And Charlie, he didn't get angry or anything. I didn't know what he was going to do, but he just got his guitar and packed up. He just packed up and looked like he's getting ready to leave. Well, when he packed up, the tenor saxophonist saw that Charlie was going to leave, and so the saxophonist himself put his own saxophone in the case and left. Mm-hmm. Now, the minute the saxophone player left, Charlie took his guitar out again and began to play. And I was so young that a lot of times young people don't know any better. They'll ask questions that you shouldn't ask. Like, young kids come up to me and they'll say, how old are you, or how much money do you make? I mean, and they're so young they don't really know that those aren't too cool to ask.
Yeah,
like
really.
That. So they don't know any better. So I asked him why he did that. And he said to me, he said, I don't ever take the guitar out of my case unless I'm either going to learn something, have fun, or make some money. Mm-hmm. Now, when you stop and think about it, there's not probably any other reason to take the instrument out of the case. So that's what I mean. At the same time that he was kind of inarticulate, if you just listen, if you just analyze what I said, it's pretty practical.
Sure is.
See?
What was his favorite equipment?
What was what?
His favorite equipment.
I don't know. I don't know what his favorite. I mean, I wouldn't know if what he played was because he didn't know any better to get something better, or it was convenient, or that's all he could buy, or there wasn't much else around. I really wouldn't know. But what he was playing was a small Gibson amplifier. If there was such a one called 150 or 185 or some, I don't know. But it looked to me like either a 10 or 12 inch speaker. I'm not sure now, but it was one of those old Gibsons that was in what they used to call airplane cloth. Do you remember that?
Sure do.
Yeah, with the 3 orange bands down it, and the guitar, the amplifier, I think was in the case, but you could take it out. I think you could take it out because it would get too hot.
Now, he played louder than you were accustomed to.
Yes,
Uh-huh.
but not by any means, not in any way like, Deep Purple or something like that, or a Blue Cheer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Barney, I have heard, maybe you can verify this, that Charlie Christian has some sisters still living in Oklahoma City?
I don't know. I do know he had a brother who just died recently. His name was Clarence. But I never met him, and this is one of the things I was going to do after I had moved there, but he passed away, and I think he passed away in this year.
Oh, too bad.
Yeah.
Where did he live?
I don't know.
In Oklahoma City?
In Oklahoma City, yes.
Can you suggest, besides trying to round up Benny Goodman, other people who would be essential to interview for a Christian cover story?
Yes. Well, except she just passed away. Would have been Mary Lou Williams. She just passed away. Well, the guy to talk to would be John Hammond. John Hammond of CBS, who is the father of John Hammond, the guitar player. Yeah, John Hammond would be one. That would be one. Another would be Benny Goodman. Then some of the musicians. You could interview a guy that's in California right now who played drums with the Benny Goodman Sextet, Nick Fatool.
How do you?
Fatool.
Where's he?
He's in L.A. and he's in the musicians directory. All you have to do is call L.A. The Musicians Union, ask for directory, and then tell them you want the name, you want the number.
Now, Christian didn't appear on stage with Benny's big band because he was black. Is that true?
I don't know. I don't know. I do know this, that he told me that he appeared at the White House with the sextet during the administration of Franklin Delano Roosevelt. So he did play at the White House with Benny Goodman in a mixed band. And he also told me a funny story, and I don't know if I put that in or not, but he told me at the time that he was playing, but people weren't just listening to it, they were dancing to the Benny Goodman Sextet. They were dancing to it. And some lady came up to him and really didn't recognize the electric guitar, but had heard him play some solos. And she told him, she said, "You're the best banjo player I ever heard."
That was at the White House?
Yes.
That's pretty funny.
Yeah.
Is there anything else you can think of adding, Barney?
Well, I'll tell you this. When I was a kid, I listened to a lot of different musicians, and as time has gone on, when I listen back to them, many of them don't sound as good now as they did at the time, or I say, well, that was okay then, but things have kind of moved ahead. There are a few that sound just as good as they did then, and very few of them sound better to me now. And of those that sound better to me, I have to try to figure out why this is so, what's happening. The only thing I can think of is that music actually was great. It was great all the time. And if it sounds better to me now, the music itself hasn't changed. I've changed, and it must be that I simply can, through my own having acquired more insight, more education, and more experience, that I'm in a better position to appraise it and see it, see more wonderful things in it that were always there, but I couldn't see it. And of such a thing, Charlie Christian, right now, as I'm talking to you right now, it honestly sounds better to me now than it did when I was a kid listening in Muskogee, Oklahoma.
Really?
It sounds better. It's classic. It's classic, not classical, but classic in that it weathers the deterioration of time. Time in itself removes fads. Remember when you were a kid, there was Howdy Doody buttons, and there was Davy Crockett caps.
Sure.
And when you were a kid, my own kids, they had Davy Crockett caps. I told them the day would come when nobody would be wearing these caps and nobody would know about Davy Crockett. They couldn't believe it. How about when Hopalong Cassidy was such a big thing?
Yeah.
And hula hoops and all these things. Well, the point I'm trying to get at is, in time, some of these fads do not stand up. Not only they don't stand up, they die. They die and they never come back again. But classic music, and again, I don't mean classical music, but the very nature of what is classic means that it holds up and transcends time in a very graceful manner. Paintings have done this. Literature has done this. I mean, Shakespeare today is no less than he ever was.
True.
Charlie Christian stands up. And I think that when I listen to him, I'm aware that he doesn't have a great chordal knowledge. I'm aware that he's not the fastest guy in the world. I'm aware that he plays certain figures that he played before, and that it's a limited kind of repertoire. And I'm aware of all of these things. I'm aware that he didn't really play much on a very fast song, but you must listen to people for what they are and not what they aren't. I mean, it's not really right to listen to someone and it's really just like looking at a banana and wanting to hit it and beat it for not being an apple. It can only be a banana. We're all what we are. I mean, Segovia doesn't play Charlie Parker songs, and Chet Atkins doesn't play bebop, and Tiny Grimes, isn't playing a transcription of Claire de Lune on the guitar. We all do what we do.
Yeah.
We all do what we do. And for what he did, as I listen to it, it embodies. It isn't all that's going on in jazz, but it is the personification of jazz. It is one. His contribution represents one of the examples of a high standard of excellence, along with Lester Young, Billie Holiday. To me, it's not all that's ever happened, and it's not all that's going on now, but it represents so much of what led to other things, and not only that, but it stands up well right now. And I don't hear that many people. I mean, even though they play a lot of notes, I don't hear that many people, but not even on the guitar, but on others with playing with his kind of time. I don't hear people making statements. I certainly don't hear people being themselves. When I hear Charlie Christian, I always know it's Charlie Christian. I hear a lot of people playing instruments. I don't know who they are. There's no identity. So I'm thinking in terms of what I would call jazz music. I think of him more. I don't think of him as a guitar player. I think of him as a person who possessed a great amount of feeling for expressing jazz, and he happened to choose the guitar.
Thanks, Barney.
Okay.
This is great.
Well, I'm sure glad, and I as I told you, I'm delighted that you're. The thing I want to say is, it's not just like holding on to I'm not using my sentiment. I'm not using my sentiment to like recapture the good old days and say, "Oh yeah, man."
No, I don't get that impression.
Like you talk to young kids, they'll say, "Oh, but Buddy Holly was really great. I'll always love Buddy Holly," but it's a kind of a sentimental thing because you went to school and maybe you were dating a girl and Buddy Holly was doing something, and you're caught up in identifying the thing with social things in your life, and I'm really trying to be objective, and I'm just trying to say that he was a bitch.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he really was, and I'm glad you're doing a thing on him, and I'm really glad that you chose me to ask about it.
Thanks, Barney.
Okay.
Okay.
All the best.
See you.
Bye-bye now.
I took Barney's advice and reached out to Benny Goodman and Columbia producer John Hammond, who both agreed to be interviewed for my Charlie Christian cover story. In future podcasts, I'll present these conversations as well. Before signing off, I want to thank my producer, Nick Hunt, staff of the Southern Folklife Collection, and my subscribers for making this podcast possible. This is copyright 2022 by Jazz Obrecht, all rights reserved. Thank you for listening in.